Welcome back on HQ. We're going to take a hard left here and look at the worst teams in the NFL. There are three that are tied for the worst record at 2-10. The Jags, the Raiders, and the Giants. And you got the Pats here at 3-10. Then you got four more teams that only have 3 wins, but fortunately for them, they only have 9 losses so far. Not pretty for these teams. Sorry, Jacqueline.
It's all right.
Sitting right at the top there. Time now to welcome in former GM and Executive Vice President of the Titans, John Robinson, and our senior NFL draft analyst, Ryan Wilson, here to help us chat through the current worst teams in the National Football League. Somebody's got to be it, right, guys? Thanks for joining us today. Let's start the conversation with Jacqueline's team at Jacksonville. John, the Jags were dubbed the best team assembled by the Jacksonville Jaguars ever by owner Shad Khan at the start of the season, and they're off to their worst start in 12 games in their franchise history. They've been mathematically eliminated from the playoff race for the 2nd consecutive season. From your experience as a GM, what's got to change here?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the stats, you know, they're picking again in the top. You know, they got the #1 overall pick right now. They've had 14 top 10 picks since 2008, the #1 overall pick a couple times. So it just keeps repeating itself, you know. They don't really have a lot of big ticket free agents. They re-signed Walker Little recently, you know, to kind of play left tackle. Andre Sisco, the safety, is kind of the only player they'd probably look to try to retain, but they're dead last in yards per game. Trevor Lawrence's quarterback rating is 25th in the league, so it's just not working there. So I know that much has been made about what Shad said early on in the season about the best roster ever assembled, but there's more to just putting a roster together. You got to build a team there, and the team's not working. So I think there's got to be some pretty big shakeups, you know, on the horizon down there in Jacksonville.
Katie, I feel sort of like the Grinch because you bring me on during the holiday season to talk about all the bad things because we're having the draft focus. But tell Jacqueline I'm here to bring some cheer to the Jacksonville Jaguars in terms of yeah, let's see what happens, right? I mean, we've seen the past. It hasn't been great. Let's mix things up here. So in terms of the draft focus, John talked about it. They had 3 #1 overall picks going back to the Trevor Lawrence situation. Took Travon Walker, who's sort of coming along, but you can question whether he was the first overall pick. In this latest mock draft that I did, I had him trading down. Like, I love Travis Hunter more than any other play in this draft class, but he's probably not the biggest need, both metaphorically and physically, that the Jacksonville Jaguars need. I think he's going to be special wherever he goes, but I had them trading down a few spots, stockpiling some picks because they could use as many picks as possible, and taking defensive tackle Mason Graham out of Michigan. He's had a special season. He's a special physical talent, and I love the idea of putting him next to Mason Smith, who they drafted in the 2nd round out of LSU, and then bookending them with Hines Allen and of course, the aforementioned Travon Walker. And now you're cooking with something. Offensive tackle would have been a possibility here, but John mentioned they re-upped Walker Little. They have Anton Harrison, who they drafted in the 1st round last year. So baby steps, Jacqueline, but you stockpile some picks, get another big body, and then fingers crossed you can keep Trevor Lawrence healthy.
All right, Ryan, if you're the bearer of bad news here, then maybe I'll have you stick around. We could talk about the 49ers for another 20 minutes or so. But until then, let's move on to the Raiders. Outside of Brock Bowers, who we just discussed on the last segment there, the Black and Silver have also struggled mightily this season, only 2 wins as well. Head coach Antonio Pierce is rightfully on the hot seat here. John, is that the biggest problem with this team, or are there deeper issues to address than just the head coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think they first and foremost, they've got to formulate an identity. Like, what do they want to be? You know, we can't just keep talking about the Raider way. You know, Coach Al Davis, his motto was just win, baby, and they're not winning right now. You mentioned one of their big-time playmakers on offense, Brock Bowers. I'd say on the other side of the ball is Max Crosby. You know, he's a terror for opposing offenses. But right now they've got the 2nd overall pick. They've got $112 million in cap room. Is Mark Davis going to allow Tom and Antonio Pierce to reconstruct this team to formulate that identity? They're dead last in rushing the football. And you know, you've got teams like, you know, Kansas City, the perennial power in the NFL. You've got the Chargers who are coming on. You've got Denver with a late surge here. So that division has really kind of taken off here in the last, you know, month or so, with the Raiders standing back in the dust. So there's some big decisions to be made here in the next few weeks about what direction they're going to go. But they've got to retool that team roster top to bottom.
Yeah, John makes a good point about the rest of the AFC West. New coach in Los Angeles Chargers. They have Justin Herbert, a franchise quarterback. We know what Jim Harbaugh can do in terms of getting the most out of a team. Bo Nix, the 6th quarterback taken, 12th overall. Sean Payton's guy. He is making it work. It hasn't always been pretty, but that team has 8 wins, and that's certainly noteworthy. And, of course, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are special in another category. All those teams have something that the Raiders don't, and that's a quarterback. And I do wonder if they had wished they'd made a move to get one of those 6 quarterbacks last year. The consolation prize of Brock Bowers is a pretty good consolation prize. There are worse things to have happen to you. But this quarterback class isn't nearly as deep as last year's. We've talked about that. That said, as John noted, they're picking 2nd overall. They're taking Shedeur Sanders. If Cam Ward is gone, who's a slight favorite for me as QB1 over QB1B and Shedeur Sanders, they have to take a quarterback. You cannot come out of this draft without a quarterback, including what's available in free agency, which doesn't appear to be much right now. Shedeur does a lot with a little. He's done that for 2 years at Colorado. He's made vast improvements from when he transferred and came with his dad from Jackson State. And I think he's going to continue to get better in the right system, which means, and we see this in Denver, we see this in Los Angeles, and of course in Kansas City, you have to put the right infrastructure in place around a young quarterback. And if that happens in Las Vegas, they can be just as competitive as everyone else in that division chasing after the Chiefs.
Well, if they take Shedeur Sanders, maybe they can kill 2 birds with 1 stone there and pick up Deion Sanders as the coach as well, as that seems to be the case everywhere that his son goes. Now let's talk about the G-Man. I mean, Wolf, also sporting a 2-10 record. They pay Daniel Jones all that money. Then they turn around, they bench him for the season before releasing him. They have a solid receiving core. They've got some bright spots on defense. John, is this a team that perhaps is just a quarterback away?
Well, I think that's probably the plan, and I think that's kind of was the plan going into this season, as was how that unfolded on Hard Knocks. It'll be interesting to see. I know Mr. Mara gave Brian and Joe a vote of confidence there a couple weeks ago. Hopefully he sticks with it. I got a ton of respect for Coach Daboll. I worked with him in New England, and I know Joe Shane for a long time. But they let Saquon Barkley walk, and that episode where he showed his dismay if he went to Philly is fresh in everyone's minds. But they do need a quarterback. They're 31st in passing yards per game. They're picking 3rd. They've got $60 million in camp. Really, the big ticket free agent for those guys is Darius Slayton, one of those receivers that you mentioned. And the pass rush was bolstered last year with Burns. Dexter Lawrence is a force in there, and then Kayvon Thibodeau's coming back now. So I think the focus will be on offense to get this turnaround for them next season.
Katie, you said, are they just 1 quarterback away? And it seems maybe silly to say after how Daniel Jones' situation ended. But remember, when Brian Daboll arrived, they had very little to work with in terms of skill position players outside of Daniel Jones. And that first season, there was some reason for excitement. Now, the wheels have since fallen off, and Daniel Jones is now in Minnesota. And the other issue is in this mock draft, I had the Jets leapfrogging the Giants, and we'll talk about that in a second. And now the Giants are on the outside looking in terms of having a quarterback. And John talked about Hard Knocks, and it was made quite clear that they were very interested in Jaden Daniels, and Drake May weren't able to make that happen either. So, again, this could be a Brock Bowers-type consolation prize. You're getting Travis Hunter, and there are worse fates to have because we know how special he is as a cornerback. You can have a series of plays for him, maybe 15 to 20 snaps on offense. What can't happen is he can't play 120 snaps a game in the NFL like he does in Colorado. It's just not sustainable. But his ability to take over games, whether it's making plays on defense or whether it's making a big catch down the stretch for Shedeur Hunter in this offense, or Shedeur Sanders in this offense, it truly makes him different than everyone else. And I love the idea of him being out there with league neighbors for a few snaps a game, and also helping out Tay Banks, the former first-round pick, who has struggled this year at cornerback for the Giants. So ideally, you get a quarterback. If you can't get one through the draft and you don't want to reach, you just settle for Travis Hunter and feel better about things.
Imagine settling for Travis Hunter. And like you said, Malik Neighbors, Travis Hunter, sign me all the way up for that. Granted that they get themselves a quarterback. Now for the other team in New York, perhaps the most disappointing of the bunch, the Jets. We're not supposed to be 3-9, fellas. This was supposed to be a team led by future Hall of Famer Aaron Rodgers that was to contend not only for the AFC East, but possibly the Super Bowl this year. John, what went wrong and how do you fix it?
Well, it's going to start with the hiring of a general manager and a head coach that's going to have to stay aligned and create a vision of what the team's going to look like. Much has been said about Woody Johnson coming out with his his desires for Aaron Rodgers, whether it's to let him play or put Tyrod in there. But the facts are they're second to last in total yards offensively with all the firepower that they've had on that side of the ball. It just hasn't worked. They're picking 6th right now, so they're kind of in the middle of the first round. They're going to have to make some moves potentially. They don't have a ton of cap room with only $33 million, so they're going to have to finagle around that. But at the end of the day, the decision on the quarterback's got to be made, and the head coach and the general manager need to be aligned with the owner in making a decision about what the future of the Jets is going to hold.
Yeah, and John's exactly right that if you got to be on the same page if you're the GM and the head coach. We'll see what happens with Woody Johnson, whether he ends up being an ambassador and his brother takes over, as happened 4 years ago. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But in this mock draft, Katie and John, I had the Jets trading up from 6 because you're not going to get a quarterback at 6 most likely to number 1 overall. That allows the Jags to move down and stockpile picks and get a big body as well. And they went with Cam Ward, who I like a hair better, as I mentioned, over Shedeur Sanders. We'll see how that plays itself out in the coming weeks and months as the draft approaches, because a lot can certainly change. But I think right now there are probably 2 quarterbacks likely to go in the first round, and then after that you might be reaching a little bit. And look, man, Father Time is undefeated, and Aaron Rodgers is the first ballot Hall of Famer and done a lot of great things in this league, but you can tell week to week he is not the same guy, and you cannot move forward with him with a new coach and a new GM and expect different results, because Aaron Rodgers is who he is at this point. So I think a hard reset's what's going to have to happen. I'm sure Jets fans don't want to hear that, and it might be some rough seas ahead in the near term. But if you get the quarterback right and you get the GM and head coach right, things can change quickly. Ask the Houston Texans, ask the Washington Commanders. So those are the things you got to get right. And moving forward, you can see some incremental successes, even if it might be rough patches for the next year or so.
Ryan Wilson, those are 3 things that the Jets organization has never been able to get right, but there is some positive thinking on your side, and I appreciate that from you. Thanks so much to Jim and to Ryan. For more of Ryan Wilson, check out the With the First Pick podcast. Ryan is joined by longtime NFL GM Rick Spielman as they dive into mock drafts, prospects, and more. It's With the First Pick pod for all your NFL draft needs. You can scan the QR code there or listen wherever you get your podcasts.